The city skyline shimmered under the late afternoon sun, a dazzling display of glass and steel that seemed to pulse with ambition. Marcus Caldwell, a man whose name was etched into the foundations of the city's most luxurious skyscrapers, sat in the back seat of his chauffeured Bentley, his sharp gray eyes flicking over the horizon. At 54, Marcus was the picture of success, a real estate tycoon whose empire spanned continents, his every move tracked by business journals and tabloids alike. His charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, clung to his broad frame, and the subtle gleam of his platinum watch caught the light as he adjusted his cufflinks. He was on his way to a charity auction, one of those glittering events where the elite gathered to flaunt their wealth under the guise of generosity. But as the car slowed at a busy intersection, his gaze drifted to the sidewalk, and the world he'd carefully curated seemed to tilt. There, beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, stood two girls. They were twins, no older than 11 or 12, their faces smudged with grime and their clothes a patchwork of hand-me-downs. One wore a faded green jacket, its sleeves too long, swallowing her small hands. The other clutched a thin blue shawl, frayed at the edges, as if it might unravel with a single tug. Their dark hair was tangled, but their eyes, identical, wide, and haunting, held a quiet intensity that stopped Marcus cold. They moved with purpose, weaving through the crowd, holding out a dented tin cup to passers-by. Most ignored them, their steps quickening as if the girls' poverty might be contagious. Marcus watched, his jaw tightening, as a man in a hurry nearly knocked the smaller twin off her feet. She stumbled but caught herself, her expression unchanging, and something about her resilience struck him like a blow. "Slow down," Marcus said to his driver, his voice low but firm. The Bentley eased to a stop, and he leaned closer to the tinted window, studying the twins. They were so young, so fragile, yet there was a defiance in the way they held themselves, a silent vow to survive. He'd seen poverty before, glimpses of it from boardroom windows or charity galas. But this felt different, personal almost. The girl in the green jacket glanced up, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes met his through the glass. Her stare wasn't pleading or desperate. It was searching, as if she could see the man behind the wealth. Marcus's breath hitched, and he looked away, his fingers tightening around the leather armrest. "Drive," he muttered, and the car pulled forward, the hum of the engine drowning out the street's chaos. But that girl's gaze clung to him, an unwelcome ghost that followed him to the auction. The venue was a spectacle of opulence, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and tables laden with caviar and vintage wine. Marcus moved through the crowd with ease, his smile polished and his handshake firm, fielding compliments on his latest high-rise and deflecting questions about his personal life. He bid generously on a rare painting, earning murmurs of approval, but his mind wasn't there. It kept drifting back to the twins, to the way they'd stood together, unyielding against a world that had clearly dealt them a brutal hand. Why did they bother him so much? He'd seen worse. Families sleeping in alleys, children hawking trinkets in the rain. But those girls, there was something about them, a spark that felt almost familiar. He downed a glass of scotch, the burn grounding him, and made a decision. He didn't know why, but he needed to see them again. Maybe it was guilt or curiosity, or something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Whatever it was, it pulled at him, insistent and unrelenting. The next evening, Marcus canceled a dinner with investors and directed his driver back to that same corner. The twins were there, just as he'd expected, their tin cup now heavier with coins. He watched from the car for a moment, noting the way they worked as a unit, one scanning the crowd, the other collecting spare change with a quiet thank you. They were survivors, he realized, and the thought both impressed and unsettled him. He stepped out of the Bentley, his polished shoes stark against the cracked pavement, and approached them, his usual confidence tempered by something he couldn't quite place. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. The twins froze, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into their faces, the way their cheeks hollowed from too many missed meals. "What are your names?" he asked, crouching slightly to meet their level. The girl in the green jacket spoke first, her voice steady despite the wariness in her eyes. "I'm Mara. This is Mila." Her sister, Mila, stayed silent, her grip tightening on the tin cup as if it were her only defense. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he'd expected, but their guarded resilience threw him off balance. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, glancing at the crowded street. "It's dangerous for kids like you." Mara's chin lifted, a flicker of defiance in her expression. "We manage. Always have." Her words hit him harder than they should have. She was so young, yet her tone carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. Marcus felt a pang of something, guilt, maybe, or admiration, and acted on impulse. "Let's make a deal," he said, his voice steadying. "Swap clothes with each other, right now. If you do, I'll buy you both a real dinner. Hot food as much as you want." The twins exchanged a glance, their silent communication almost uncanny. Mara's eyes flicked to Marcus, assessing him, while Mila's expression softened, her hunger betraying her caution. After a moment, Mara nodded. "Okay," she said, and they began to trade clothes, Mara shrugging off the green jacket, Mila unwrapping the blue shawl. Marcus watched, his curiosity deepening. It was an odd request, he knew, but he wanted to test their trust, to see how far their bond went. As Mila pulled on the jacket, her sleeve rode up, revealing a small star-shaped birthmark on her inner wrist. Marcus's heart stopped. That mark, he knew it. His mind spiraled back to a memory he'd locked away, to a woman named Clara, the only person he'd ever loved. She'd had the same birthmark, in the exact same place, a detail he'd traced with his fingers during stolen moments 14 years ago. His throat tightened, and the world seemed to narrow to that single point on Mila's wrist. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the street's din. Mara caught his reaction, her eyes sharpening. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, stepping protectively in front of her sister. Marcus shook his head, struggling to find words. His pulse raced, fragments of the past colliding with the present. Clara had been pregnant when they'd parted ways, a fact he'd learned only after she'd vanished, leaving him with nothing but a letter and a broken heart. He'd searched for her, hired investigators, but she'd disappeared like smoke. Could these girls be hers? Could they be his? "I need to know," he said, his voice raw. "Where is your mother?" Mila's face crumpled, and she looked away, her small frame trembling. Mara's expression hardened, but her voice was quiet when she spoke. "She's dead. Been gone since we were 6. It's just us now." The words were a knife, sharp and unforgiving. Marcus staggered back, his hand finding the side of his car for balance. Clara gone? And these girls, his girls, he felt it in his bones, left to survive on their own? The weight of it crushed him, guilt and grief intertwining until he could barely breathe. He'd spent years chasing wealth, building towers to touch the sky, while his own daughters scraped by in the shadows. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know." Mara studied him, her eyes searching his face for something she couldn't name. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Because I think I knew your mother. A long time ago." The twins stared at him, their expressions a mix of shock and cautious hope. Mila spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. "What was her name?" "Clara," Marcus said, the word heavy with years of unspoken love. Mara's breath caught, her hand reaching for Mila's. That's her name," she whispered. The air between them seemed to hum, charged with a truth too vast to process. Marcus's legs felt unsteady, but he held his ground, his mind racing. "Come with me," he said, his voice urgent. "Please, I'll get you food, a safe place to sleep. We'll figure this out together." The twins hesitated, their instincts sharpened by years of fending for themselves. But something in Marcus's eyes, raw, unguarded, and achingly sincere, made them nod. They climbed into the Bentley, their small figures swallowed by the plush seats, and as the car glided through the city, Marcus felt a shift inside him. This wasn't just about helping two girls. This was about facing a past he'd run from, about claiming a future he hadn't dared to imagine. At a quiet diner, Marcus watched as Mara and Mila ate, their hunger a stark reminder of the life they'd endured. He asked careful questions, piecing together their story. After Clara's death, they'd bounced through foster homes, each one worse than the last until they'd fled, choosing the streets over neglect. Every detail was a fresh wound, but it also stoked a fire in Marcus. He couldn't undo the years they'd lost, but he could give them something better. "I want to help you," he said, leaning across the table. "Not just tonight, for good." Mara paused, a fry halfway to her mouth. "Why?" she asked, her voice guarded but curious. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a small worn photo. It was Clara smiling in a sunlit park, her star-shaped birthmark visible on her wrist. He slid it toward the twins, his hands trembling. "This is her," he said, "your mother." Mila's eyes filled with tears, her fingers brushing the photo. "She looks happy," she whispered. "She was," Marcus said, his voice thick. "And she loved you. I didn't know about you, but now that I do, I'm not walking away." Mara's gaze softened, but her voice held a challenge. "You don't even know us." "I know you're hers," Marcus said, his conviction unwavering. "And that's enough for me to start." The twins exchanged a look, their bond a language only they understood. Mila nodded slightly and Mara let out a breath. "Okay," she said, "but we're not charity cases." Marcus smiled, the first real smile he'd felt in years. "I wouldn't dare think you are." Over the next few weeks, Marcus moved mountains. He secured custody, enrolled the twins in a private school, and transformed a wing of his penthouse into their home. But it wasn't the luxuries that mattered. It was the quiet moments. Mara's sharp wit, Mila's gentle curiosity, the way they began to trust him, bit by bit. Marcus, who'd spent decades chasing power, found himself chasing something else. Their laughter, their safety, their future. One night as they sat on the penthouse balcony, the city sprawling below, Mila turned to him. "Do you think Mom knew you'd find us?" she asked, her voice soft. Marcus looked at her, then at Mara, their faces illuminated by the city's glow. "I think she hoped," he said, his voice catching. "And I'm glad I did." Mara reached for his hand, her grip firm. "You're not so bad," she said, a teasing smile breaking through. And as the stars blinked above, Marcus felt whole for the first time in years. The twins weren't just his second chance. They were his everything. Wealth could build towers, but love, he realized, built a life.